The Vanishing. Chapter 1. The Empty Apartment. Detective Rachel Turner stood in the dimly lit hallway of the Windsor Arms, an old apartment building that had seen better days. The wallpaper, once elegant, now peeled away from the walls in long, jagged strips. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something far less identifiable but infinitely more unsettling. Rachel's fingers tightened around the handle of her flashlight as she stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. The call had come in late last night. A young woman, Emily Barnes, had been reported missing by her roommate after she failed to return from a night out. According to the roommate, Emily had gone to meet someone she had met online, but she had never come home. The police had found no signs of struggle, no clues, no hints. Just an empty apartment with all of Emily's belongings untouched. Rachel had seen her share of missing person cases, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the eerie silence of the apartment or the absence of any struggle. It was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She approached the door to Emily's apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. The lock had not been tampered with, the windows were all intact, and the security footage from the building's entrance showed Emily returning to the apartment alone at 1:32 a.m. But after that, she simply vanished. No one had seen her leave, and her phone had been turned off. Rachel pushed the door open, the hinges creaking as if protesting her intrusion. The apartment was eerily silent. The kind of silence that only existed in places where something terrible had happened. The living room was neat, with nothing out of place. A blanket was folded on the couch, a book left open on the coffee table, and a pair of shoes neatly aligned by the door. It was as if Emily had simply evaporated into thin air. Rachel moved through the apartment slowly, methodically, her eyes scanning every corner for something, anything, that could explain the young woman's disappearance. As she reached the bedroom, a chill ran down her spine. The bed was made, but on the pillow was an indentation, the clear outline of where someone had laid their head. But the room felt wrong, as if the shadows themselves were watching her. She walked over to the closet, her hand hesitating on the door handle before pulling it open. The closet was empty, except for a single hanger swaying gently as if recently disturbed. As she turned to leave the room, her gaze fell upon the mirror on the wall. For a brief moment, she could have sworn she saw something, a shadow, a flicker of movement behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Rachel shook her head, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. But the unease in her gut wouldn't go away. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number of Emily's roommate, trying to focus on the case at hand. "This is Detective Turner. I'm at Emily's apartment now. I need you to come in for further questioning," she said, keeping her voice steady. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, filled with fear. "Did you find anything? Is she okay?" "We're still investigating," Rachel replied, trying to keep the tension out of her voice. "I need to know more about the person she went to meet last night. Anything you can tell me could help." The roommate hesitated, her voice trembling. She said his name was Mark, but she was secretive about him. "I don't know anything else. She wouldn't even show me his picture." Rachel frowned. "Do you have access to her social media? Maybe we can find some clues there." "Yeah, I can get into her accounts. But detective, there's something else." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" The roommate's voice dropped to a whisper. Emily had been acting strange for weeks. She kept saying she felt like someone was watching her. "I thought she was just being paranoid, but now, I don't know." A cold shiver ran down Rachel's spine. She glanced around the room once more, the feeling of being watched more intense than ever. "I'll need you to come in right away," she said, her voice more urgent now. "And bring anything you have on Emily's online activity." As she hung up the phone, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. She turned back to the mirror and stared at her reflection. But it wasn't her own face that unsettled her. It was the sensation that someone, or something, was staring back. Chapter 2. The Last Contact. Rachel's mind raced as she made her way back to the precinct. Emily's words echoed in her thoughts. "I feel like someone is watching me." Those were the words of a woman who felt hunted, cornered. The cold dread that had settled in her chest during the investigation at the apartment now pulsed with an icy resolve. She needed to know who Mark was, and she needed to know fast. The station was quiet when she arrived, the hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone the only sounds breaking the silence. Rachel made her way to her desk, where a small stack of files waited for her. She barely glanced at them before pulling up Emily Barnes's social media profiles on her computer. The roommate had already sent over the login details, and Rachel wasted no time diving into Emily's online life. Her social media accounts were a mix of mundane posts, pictures of her cat, updates about her job, and the occasional night out with friends. But something about the last few weeks of activity felt off. Emily's posts had become less frequent, her tone more subdued. And then there was the private messaging. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she scanned the list of recent contacts, searching for the elusive Mark. It didn't take long to find him. Mark Collins. The profile was almost too perfect. Handsome, charming, with just enough mystery to intrigue someone like Emily. But as Rachel clicked through his photos and posts, she noticed something odd. There were no tags from friends, no comments from family. In fact, the profile was strangely devoid of any personal connections. The more she looked, the more she was convinced that Mark Collins wasn't real. Or at least, the person behind the profile wasn't who they claimed to be. She quickly pulled up the reverse image search tool and ran a check on Mark's profile pictures. As the results loaded, her phone buzzed on the desk. Was the roommate? "Detective, I just remembered something else," the voice on the other end said, anxiety threading every word. "A few days before Emily disappeared, she mentioned seeing someone outside our building. She thought it was Mark, but when she got closer, he was gone. She said it was like he just vanished into thin air." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she processed the information. Did she describe what he looked like? She said he was wearing a hoodie and she couldn't see his face clearly. But it was the way he moved, she said. It was like he was gliding. Rachel's skin prickled with unease. She thanked the roommate and hung up, her mind racing. She needed more information, more concrete evidence to piece together what had happened to Emily. As she turned back to her computer, the results from the reverse image search came through. Rachel's blood ran cold. The photos on Mark Collins's profile were stolen, lifted from various social media accounts and stock image sites. Whoever Emily had been communicating with, it wasn't Mark. And whoever they were, they had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her mind whirling. She was dealing with someone who was not only meticulous but dangerous. She needed to find out more about Emily, about this imposter, and about the strange occurrences leading up to her disappearance. But as she stared at the computer screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was observing her every move. Her eyes flicked to the window beside her desk, but all she could see was the reflection of the room behind her. And for a moment she thought she saw a shadow move across the glass, just beyond the edge of the light. Chapter 3. The Stranger's Path. Rachel decided to visit Emily's apartment building once more, this time with a keener eye and a heightened sense of urgency. The information about the mysterious figure lurking outside the building haunted her thoughts. Was this Mark, a stalker, or was there something even more sinister at play? As she approached the Windsor Arms, the evening had begun to descend, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch across the pavement. The building loomed ahead, its aged exterior looking even more menacing under the fading light. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her as a chill breeze swept through the street, her footsteps echoing eerily in the quiet. She entered the building, the familiar scent of mildew and dampness assaulting her senses. Rachel made her way to the security room, where the building's aging cameras stored their footage. She had already reviewed the video from the night Emily disappeared, but now she wanted to go back further, to see if she could spot this hooded figure Emily had mentioned. The security guard on duty, an older man with deep-set eyes and a weary expression, nodded as she entered. "Back again, detective?" he asked, his voice gravelly with age. "Yes," Rachel replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the gnawing anxiety within her. "I need to review the footage from the last 2 weeks." The guard grunted and shuffled to the monitors, pulling up the requested dates. Rachel watched intently as the footage played back in accelerated speed. The halls and entrance of the building flashed by, people moving in and out, unaware of the scrutiny they were under. But then something caught her eye. A figure in a dark hoodie appeared at the entrance. The date and time stamp indicated it was 2 days before Emily vanished. Rachel leaned in closer as the figure seemed to linger just outside the door, their face obscured by the hood. They stood there, unmoving for what felt like an eternity, before turning and walking away, disappearing from the camera's view as if they had dissolved into the night. Rachel's pulse quickened. She fast-forwarded to the next day. The same figure appeared again, this time closer to the entrance, but always in the shadows, always just out of clear view. And then, on the night of Emily's disappearance, the figure was there once more, watching from the shadows as Emily entered the building for the last time. But this time the figure followed her inside. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She paused the footage, her eyes fixed on the screen. The figure's movements were unsettling, almost unnatural. They seemed to glide more than walk, their presence more like a shadow than a person. But the cameras failed to capture a clear image, leaving Rachel with more questions than answers. "Did you ever notice anything unusual around here?" she asked the guard, trying to mask the unease in her voice. The guard shook his head slowly, his eyes not leaving the screen. "This place always has its share of strange characters, but nothing like that," he replied, gesturing to the hooded figure on the monitor. "That one's different. Gives me the creeps just watching it." Rachel nodded, her mind racing. The figure was methodical, patient, and now likely still watching. She had to find out who, or what, this person was before anyone else went missing. She left the security room and headed for the stairs, deciding to retrace Emily's last steps. As she reached the 3rd floor where Emily's apartment was located, she felt it again, that prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She turned sharply, scanning the empty hallway, but there was nothing there. But as she walked towards Emily's door, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small scuff mark on the floor just outside the apartment, as if someone had been standing there for a long time, shifting their weight nervously. Rachel crouched down to inspect it, her mind racing with possibilities. Whoever had been here had waited a long time, waiting for the right moment. Rachel stood up and exhaled sharply, determination filling her. She was dealing with someone who was very good at what they did. Someone who had watched and planned every move. And someone who was still out there waiting. As she turned to leave, she noticed something else, a faint whisper like a breath against her ear. She spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for her gun, but the hallway was empty. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's boiler. But Rachel knew what she had heard. And she knew it wasn't her imagination. She hurried out of the building, her heart pounding as she hit the street. The night air was thick with tension, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed, watched by unseen eyes. As she walked towards her car, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the hooded figure lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty. Still, the sensation of being observed persisted, as if the very shadows themselves were alive and tracking her every move. She reached her car, quickly unlocking it and slipping inside. As she started the engine, her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, startling her. She picked it up and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Rachel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Detective Turner," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. A soft, raspy voice replied, sending a chill down her spine. "You're getting close, detective. But you're not the only one watching." The line went dead before she could respond. Rachel's heart raced as she stared at the phone, the words echoing in her mind. She was now part of the game, a game where the stakes were life and death. Chapter 4. The Dark Network. Rachel sat in her car, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. The voice on the phone had been calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly aware of her every move. Someone was playing with her, toying with her like a predator circling its prey. And the realization made her blood run cold. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Whoever this was, they were watching her, and they were confident enough to let her know. This was no ordinary stalker. This was someone with a plan, someone who had been ahead of her every step of the way. Rachel needed to regain control. She quickly dialed the precinct and asked for a trace on the call, but she wasn't surprised when the results came back untraceable. The caller had been careful, leaving no digital footprint behind. She slammed the phone down in frustration. This was more than just a case of a missing person. This was a hunt, and she was both the hunter and the hunted. She needed more information, more leverage. There was something about Emily's life that had drawn this person's attention, something buried deep in her online activities. Rachel returned to the precinct and sat down at her desk, determined to unravel the mystery before it was too late. She logged back into Emily's accounts, this time focusing on her private messages. Most of them were harmless, chats with friends, casual conversations, but one exchange caught her eye. It was from an anonymous account, with no profile picture or identifying information. The messages started out innocuous enough, but quickly became strange, almost cryptic. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" One message read. Another followed a day later. "Sometimes the shadows hide more than just darkness." Rachel's pulse quickened as she read through the messages. Emily's responses were brief, almost dismissive, but there was an underlying tension in her words. It was clear she had been unsettled by the exchanges, but she had kept it to herself. The last message from the anonymous account was sent the night before Emily disappeared. It was short, chilling in its simplicity. "I'm closer than you think." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the words. This was no coincidence. Whoever had sent these messages knew Emily, had been watching her, and had planned her disappearance with precision. She tried tracing the account, but like the phone call, it led nowhere. The person behind it had covered their tracks well, using VPNs and encrypted platforms to communicate. Rachel felt a surge of frustration. She was up against someone with resources, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But then something clicked. The messages had mentioned shadows, darkness. Rachel remembered the hooded figure in the security footage, the way they seemed to glide through the shadows, almost merging with them. Was it possible that this person was using the very darkness to their advantage, hiding in plain sight? Rachel's thoughts raced as she considered the implications. If this person was as meticulous as they seemed, they would have left no physical trace behind. But they might have left a digital one, something buried deep within the dark web, where anonymity reigned and criminals thrived. She decided to take a risk. Rachel reached out to an old contact, a hacker who had helped her on a previous case. He was known only as Shade, a fitting name for someone who navigated the darkest corners of the internet with ease. Shade responded quickly, his message brief. "I'll need time. This won't be easy." Rachel knew it was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. As she waited for Shade to dig deeper, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The voice on the phone had made it clear. She was being watched, and her every move was under scrutiny. Hours passed, the silence in the precinct growing heavy as the night deepened. Rachel's nerves were on edge, every small sound amplified in the empty space. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the hooded figure standing behind her. Finally, a message popped up on her screen. It was from Shade. "Found something. A connection to a deep web forum. But it's encrypted. Need more time." Rachel's heart sank. She didn't have time. Emily didn't have time. But she knew Shade was doing everything he could. She typed a quick response, urging him to work faster, before leaning back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing thoughts. But as soon as she did, the phone on her desk rang, the shrill sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Rachel's eyes snapped open, her hand trembling as she picked up the receiver. "Detective Turner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The same raspy voice from before responded, the words slow, deliberate. "You're looking in the wrong places, Detective. The answers aren't where you think." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The voice chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. "You'll find out soon enough. But be careful, Rachel. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed." The line went dead, leaving Rachel staring at the phone in disbelief. The threat was clear. She was getting too close, and the person behind this wanted her to back off. But Rachel wasn't one to back down. Not now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. She glanced at the computer screen, where Shade's message still flickered, a reminder that the clock was ticking. She knew she had to push forward no matter the cost. But as she prepared to dive deeper into the investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in around her, and that the next move she made might be her last. Chapter 5. Into the Abyss. Rachel's resolve hardened as she stared at the phone, the ominous voice still echoing in her mind. She knew she was walking a dangerous path, but she had no choice. Emily's life, and possibly her own, depended on her finding the truth. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She took a deep breath and refocused on her computer, watching as Shade continued to dig through the encrypted files. The wait was excruciating, every passing second feeling like an eternity. But then a notification flashed on her screen. Shade had made progress. Found something, Shade's message read. A list of usernames tied to the deep web forum. One of them matches the IP address linked to the anonymous messages sent to Emily. Rachel's pulse quickened. This was the break she needed. She quickly sent a response asking for more details. Moments later, another message popped up. The username is Watcher in the Dark. The forum is dedicated to tracking and surveillance. Creepy stuff. Whoever this is, they're part of a network of people who specialize in watching others. But there's more. This user has been active on multiple sites, all connected to missing persons cases. Rachel's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about Emily. This was bigger, much bigger. The person behind Watcher in the Dark was part of something organized, something that involved other victims. And now they were targeting her. She quickly asked Shade to track the IP address linked to the username, but the response was disheartening. They're using a complex system of proxies and relays. It's going to take time to pinpoint their location. Time. It was the one thing Rachel didn't have. She glanced at the clock on her desk, the hands ticking forward with an unyielding rhythm. She needed to act, but she didn't know where to start. The person behind this was elusive, methodical, and clearly had the upper hand. But then an idea struck her. If Watcher in the Dark was part of a network, there might be others like them, people who could be more careless, less experienced. She asked Shade to dig through the other usernames on the list, looking for any weak links that might lead them to the ringleader. As she waited, Rachel felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The shadows in the precinct seemed to grow darker, the air colder. She was being hunted, watched from every angle. But she refused to let fear take hold. She was a detective and she had a job to do. Shade's next message was a glimmer of hope. Got something. One of the other users, Shadow Seeker, has been less careful. They recently accessed a public Wi-Fi network and I've got a location, a small town about 50 miles from you. It's a long shot, but it might be worth checking out. Rachel didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat, her mind racing with possibilities. This could be the break she needed, the chance to confront someone involved in the network face to face. She informed the precinct of her destination, ensuring backup would be on standby, and then she was out the door, the cold night air biting at her skin as she hurried to her car. The drive to the small town was tense, the road winding through dense forests that seemed to close in around her. Rachel kept her eyes on the road, but her mind was consumed with thoughts of what awaited her. If she found Shadow Seeker, she might get the information she needed to track down Watcher in the Dark. But if this was a trap, she could be walking into a deadly ambush. The town was quiet when she arrived, the streets nearly deserted. Rachel parked her car near a small diner, the only place still open at this hour. The location Shade had given her was nearby, a rundown motel on the edge of town. Rachel approached the motel with caution, her hand resting on the gun holstered at her side. She entered the lobby, the smell of stale cigarettes and mildew assaulting her senses. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as she approached, his face half hidden behind a newspaper. Rachel showed her badge, asking if anyone had checked in under the name Shadow Seeker, or if anyone suspicious had been around. The clerk shrugged, uninterested. We don't ask questions here. People come and go. I don't remember no names. Rachel's frustration mounted, but she kept her composure. Can I see your guest list for the last few days? The clerk sighed, clearly annoyed, but eventually handed over the logbook. Rachel scanned the names looking for anything that stood out. There was no shadow seeker, but one name caught her eye: Mark Collins. The same name Emily had mentioned before she disappeared. Rachel's heart raced as she circled the name. "What room is this guest in?" "Room 8, the clerk replied, already going back to his newspaper. Rachel headed down the narrow, dimly lit hallway, her senses on high alert. Room 8 was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. She approached cautiously, her hand tightening around her gun. She pushed the door open, the hinges creaking as she entered the room. It was dark, the only light coming from a flickering lamp in the corner. The room was empty, but Rachel's instincts told her something was off. She moved further inside, her eyes scanning the shadows. And then she saw it. A laptop sitting on the small table by the window, the screen glowing softly. Rachel approached it, her heart pounding. The screen displayed a login page for a secure network. The username "Watcher in the Dark" already filled in. But before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her, and the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. Rachel spun around, her gun raised, but she saw nothing, just the inky blackness pressing in from all sides. And then she heard it, a soft, menacing whisper in the darkness. "You're too late, detective. The game is almost over." Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the voice echoed around her. She reached for her phone, but it was dead, the battery drained. Panic surged through her as she realized she was trapped, isolated, with no way to call for help. But she wasn't about to give up. Rachel moved towards the window, hoping to escape, but the moment she touched the glass, it shattered, the shards slicing into her hand. She gasped in pain, but there was no time to think. She had to get out, had to get back to the precinct, back to safety. She kicked open the door and ran into the hallway, the darkness seeming to close in around her. But as she reached the exit, she felt a hand on her shoulder, cold and firm, pulling her back. Rachel spun around, her gun aimed at the figure in the shadows. But before she could fire, the figure vanished, dissolving into the darkness as if it had never been there. She stumbled out into the night, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The town was still eerily quiet, but Rachel knew she wasn't safe. She could feel the eyes watching her, tracking her every move. She hurried to her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life and she sped away, the town disappearing into the darkness behind her. But as she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed, that the game wasn't over yet. Rachel knew one thing for certain. She was in deeper than she had ever imagined, and the answers she sought were still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for her to find them. Chapter 6. The final confrontation. The drive back to the precinct was a blur, Rachel's mind racing with fear and determination. The voice, the shattered glass, the presence in the dark, all of it pointed to one chilling fact. Whoever this person was, they had the power to be anywhere, to do anything. The thought of Emily, terrified and alone, pushed her forward. She couldn't let this end with another disappearance. Not this time. When she arrived at the precinct, it was past midnight, but the building was still bustling with activity. Officers were moving quickly, files in hand, phones ringing in the background. Rachel headed straight to her desk, barely acknowledging her colleagues as she sat down and booted up her computer. Shade had left another message. "I've traced the IP address to a more precise location. It's coming from an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. You need to be careful. This place is notorious for criminal activity." Rachel's heart pounded as she read the message. This was it, the lead she had been waiting for. She quickly sent a reply, asking Shade to stay online and provide any additional information he could gather. Then, without wasting a moment, she grabbed her jacket and headed out, calling for backup as she went. The drive to the warehouse felt interminable. The streets were deserted, the city bathed in the cold glow of streetlights. Rachel could feel the tension building within her, the knowledge that she was walking into a trap gnawing at the edges of her mind. But she couldn't afford to back down now. When she arrived at the warehouse, she found it exactly as Shade had described. Abandoned, with broken windows and rusted metal doors hanging off their hinges. The place reeked of decay and neglect, but there was something else too, a sense of foreboding that made the hairs on the back of Rachel's neck stand up. She waited for her backup, the minutes stretching out as she stared at the dark building. When the squad cars finally arrived, Rachel briefed the officers quickly, her voice tight with urgency. They needed to move in fast and secure the area before whoever was inside had a chance to escape. The team moved in silently, spreading out to cover all exits. Rachel took point, her gun drawn as she approached the main entrance. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the vast, empty space inside. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. Rachel's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing rows of old machinery and stacks of rotting wooden crates. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. As she moved deeper into the building, Rachel's senses were on high alert. Every creak, every shadow made her heart race. She knew this place was a trap, but she had no choice. She had to find Emily, had to end this nightmare once and for all. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Rachel froze, her flashlight trained on the spot where she had seen the figure. "Come out," she called, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. For a moment there was only silence. Then a voice echoed through the darkness, cold and mocking. "You're persistent, detective. I'll give you that." Rachel's blood ran cold. It was the same voice she had heard on the phone, the same voice that had haunted her nightmares. "Where's Emily?" she demanded, her flashlight sweeping across the room. A soft chuckle echoed around her, disorienting her as it seemed to come from all directions. "You're too late, Rachel. She's gone. Just like the others." Rage surged through Rachel. "No, I won't let you get away with this." But the voice only laughed again, the sound chilling in its cruelty. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about Emily. This is about you. You're the one I've been watching, the one I've been waiting for." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. This wasn't just about Emily's disappearance. She had been the target all along. The messages, the phone calls, the feeling of being watched, it had all been leading to this moment. But why? What did this person want with her? Rachel's thoughts were interrupted as the voice spoke again, this time closer. "You've been fun to watch, Rachel. So determined, so righteous. But now the game ends." Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered to life, blinding Rachel for a moment. When her eyes adjusted, she saw him, a man standing in the center of the room, dressed in black, his face obscured by a hood. His eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating intelligence. Rachel raised her gun, but the man didn't flinch. "You're not going to shoot me, detective," he said calmly. "You're going to listen, and you're going to understand." He took a step forward, his gaze locked on hers. "You've been a pawn in this game, Rachel. A piece on the board. But now you have a choice. Walk away and I'll let you live. Or keep playing and lose everything." Rachel's hand trembled as she kept her gun trained on him. She could feel the officers moving in behind her, but she didn't dare look away from the man in front of her. "Why?" she demanded. "Why do this? Why target innocent people?" The man smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. "Because I can. Because it's fun. And because people like you make it so easy." Rage and disgust welled up inside Rachel. She wanted to pull the trigger to end this monster's life right then and there. But she knew she needed him alive, needed him to pay for what he had done. "Where's Emily?" she asked again, her voice shaking with emotion. The man's smile widened. "You'll never find her, Rachel. She's gone. Just like all the others." Before Rachel could react, the man turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Rachel's heart raced as she chased after him, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. But the warehouse was a maze of corridors and rooms, and the man seemed to know it well. She could hear his footsteps echoing ahead of her, but no matter how fast she ran, she couldn't catch up. It was as if he was toying with her, leading her deeper into the labyrinthine structure. Finally, she reached a dead end, a small room with no exits. The man was nowhere to be seen, but Rachel could feel his presence, could sense him watching her from the shadows. She spun around, her gun raised, but there was no one there. The room was empty, silent except for the sound of her own ragged breathing. And then she saw it, a small, flickering light in the corner of the room. She approached it cautiously, her gun still drawn. The light was coming from a small device, a phone left on the floor. Rachel picked it up, her hands trembling. The screen displayed a single message. "Goodbye, Rachel." Before she could react, the phone exploded in a blinding flash of light and sound. Rachel was thrown back against the wall, her vision going black as the force of the explosion knocked her unconscious. When she came to, she was surrounded by officers, their voices muffled as they called her name. Rachel tried to speak, but her head was spinning, her body aching from the blast. "Detective Turner, can you hear me?" Rachel nodded weakly, her vision slowly clearing. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her head was too much. What happened?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse. One of the officers, a young woman with a concerned expression, knelt beside her. "The suspect got away. We found you unconscious. You're lucky to be alive." Rachel's heart sank as she realized what had happened. The man had escaped and Emily was still missing. She had failed. But as she lay there, her thoughts racing, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The man had made a mistake by letting her live, and she would use that mistake to hunt him down, to find Emily, and to end this nightmare once and for all. As the officers helped her to her feet, Rachel's resolve hardened. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And she was ready for the next round. Don't miss out on this gripping story. Subscribe to the channel and let us know what you think in the comments.